All right. So here we go. The February 2024 5 miles anywhere meeting. That's interesting. Give me 1 second because that's not what I expect to see when I hit share. There we go. Now it should be good. See, that's what happens when I hit record. Then I get technical difficulties. There we are. All right. And all right, there we go. All right, so couple of things. So here's our agenda. So I'll give a brief BSI weekend recap. We'll have some announcements. I know a couple people had said that they wanted to say a few things. Then we'll get to the main event with the interview with our author, Margie Deck, and her two new books, The Genius of the Place being for one about Doyle, Doyle's stories, and then with Remarkable Cunning, her Sherlock Holmes collection. Hopefully we'll have some time for a Q&A, and then we'll wrap with a little brief intro to the March meeting from Jeff Fockingham, who is on here as well. Okay, so just a brief recap from my experience of the weekend. So Thursday, and I did say I had some exciting news, Trippy, but I'll get to that in a minute. But Thursday was where Otto Penzler, who's in the center there with me, was kind enough to let us use the Mysterious Bookshop for the running of the Wessex Cup and the Doylean Awards. And as you can see from the image, it's to my stage left, I guess, or to the left, that I did win one of the fiction awards of this year. Which was pretty cool. For my story, The Joyce Armstrong Confession, which was a sequel to Doyle's Horror of the Heights. And then on the other side there is me with this year's Wessex Cup winner, Joe Eckrich. And Joe, we wanted to get a photo together since we had both won the cup. I won it the year before, and he won it this year. And so we got together at the PSI, the Broad Street Regulars, had a lunch at McSorley's, and that's us with our two trophy cups from winning a little wind-up horsey race that was actually in the Mysterious Bookshop. And if you haven't been, if you go to BSI weekend next year, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. And those are some of my favorite events. They were the really fun ones for BSI weekend. Okay. So Friday, so here's the big news, which I'm sure actually most of you already know, but I was invested in the BSI this year. So that was my big news. And so I'm in the class of 2024. There's my classmates right there. And here are all of our investiture names. And for those of you who don't know, when you're invested in the BSI, you're given a name which has some connection or some significance to you. And Wiggins invested me with the name The Board Schools, which comes from the story, The Naval Treaty. And that's when Holmes sees the board schools, and he tells Watson, like, they're on the train, and he's like, look at those. And Watson's like, what? They look like slums. And he's like, no, they're the lighthouses, the beacons of the future. And so I just thought, as being a teacher myself and being part of the Beacon Society, that I was quite touched that that's the name I was given. So that was pretty cool. I'm still kind of in shock about the whole thing. So it's very, very nice. And yeah, so other things just that also that night, which was also cool, was Otto Penzler received the 2 Shilling Award. So for his contributions to the Holmesians, and yeah, wow, it's pretty crazy. So one of my absolute favorite parts, if not my favorite part, of BSI weekend is Saturday, because Saturday is the Merchant's Room, and that's when I get to see my authors. So there are some faces there, as you might recognize. And it's always great to see them. And here's a few more. There's Brian and me. I think so. Ray I know is on the call, and so I think is David Markham. So there they are, signing books. So that was fun. And then here's the BSI lunch, which they do on Saturday. It's just this year, it's just getting more and more crowded though. So it sold out pretty quickly, but it's a lot of fun. And again, it's cool to kind of hang with some of the friends, Sherlockian friends. So if you're in New York next year, definitely let me know, because I would love to see you if I did not get a chance to see you this year. That's one of the delights. And then my last thing, Saturday night, I always go to the Lost in New York with a bunch of Sherlockians dinner. The Kegleys put this on, and they run the Sherlock Holmes Society of LA. And I try to attend every year because, again, it's just a lot of fun. They do a great job. And there's my table and on the side there. And it was great. And then I'm standing up on the other picture because they've had everyone who's got invested that year stand up. So there's me and my cravat standing there. But it was just, it was a lot of fun. So this was a great weekend, very packed. And again, just next year, if I didn't see you this year, make sure you let me know so I can say hi. I only got to go, of course, I'm one person, and I don't get to go to everything. And there were events like Ash Wednesday, Gillette Lunch, the Ash Brunch. So I thought I'd pause here, stop my sharing. And if anybody was at any of the other events and just wants to kind of give us a heads up on how they were, you can unmute and just kind of say.
Derek, I was at the Gillette lunch and oh goodness, sorry. It hasn't been that long since I woke up, so my brain is still catching up.
Okay. I think a lot of us are feeling that.
Yeah. No, the Gillette lunch was a lot of fun, fantastic, job done by Shana Carter.
Yes.
Organizing it. The third Susan Rice Mentorship Award was awarded to Francine Kitts, and there were 2 skits, and one of them was written by Ray Betzner, and you can watch it online, performed by Curtis Armstrong, Ashley Polasek, and Ken Ludwig, technically, where Curtis is Sherlock Holmes returning from the hiatus. Ashley is Mrs. Hudson, and Ken is the dummy, and it's hilarious. And then there was another super cute skit that imagined Holmes in like the James Bond universe. So Paul Singleton played Holmes, and Lee Shackelford played Blofeld, and that was very funny. It was really cute. I'm not sure that there's a recording of that one though, unfortunately. But yeah, it was fun. And then Friday night, Gaslight Gala, that's what I was playing. Yeah, we went to the Gaslight Gala for the first time in like a couple of years that it's been on, and that was just a really nice time. All praise to Chris Sorden and Anne Andriaco and the rest of the gala committee, because that was a really lovely time.
I would say that's one of the things I will miss the most about being in the BSI, is that I won't go to the Gaslight Gala anymore, because it's so fun. I love the Gaslight Gala. I just think it's a blast. So very cool. All right. Well, thank you for the update, Madeline. And again, there's so many cool events. And so if you do get a chance to go to the BSI weekend. Please know that the BSI dinner is just one event. That's the one that you have to get the invitation for, but there's so many other events you can go to, and it's the longest weekend in the world because it starts Wednesday and goes to Sunday, and just it's a blast. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen again because we're going to get to announcements next. And I want to first start by congratulating Anna Behrens, who's on this call, as she has an article in the Winter Baker Street Journal. And I believe this is Anna's first BSJ article because she was published in Canadian Homes. I still haven't gotten my copy yet, though. I'm waiting to get it. But Anna, just great job. And I really, really look forward to reading it. So thank you.
Thanks, Derek.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be fantastic. So good job for you. All right. And Tom Burns, who's also on this call, has a new book in his award-winning Natalie McMaster's mystery series. And Tom, you wanted to say a couple of words?
Yes, I do. Shooters is the 8th book in the series. It came out January 8th in electronic, and the paperback just came out a week or so ago. This is the darkest book I've ever written. I will warn you. You may feel like taking a shower after you read it, but you probably needed the shower anyway, so that's okay. Also, I am hoping to release another Sherlock Holmes book next month. I am working on some stories. I have some that were previously published by Belanger Books and the MX Books for a starter. And I'm currently working, I've come up with a new concept from my first Sherlock book, The Wizard of Montague Street, which is what I was calling Holmes when he first moved into Montague Street and ran into the kids that would become the BSI. And now I've decided to do a little series about, Holmes in that vein. So that story, which is in process, is called The Wizard Goes a Mudlarkin.
Oh, okay, cool.
And God willing, and the creek don't rise, I'll have the book out sometime in March. And then I'll probably put 10 Steps from Baker Street on Kindle Unlimited, which I haven't done, and leave the new book off. The new book is called A Peek into Watson's Dispatch Box.
Nice. Excellent. Well,
and
we look forward to we look forward to reading that, and later this year Tom's gonna be one of our guest speakers, and he'll tell us about that book. So looking forward to it. All right, on a lighter note, after the dark book. One of the fun things about BSI weekend is people get together and we drink, and we get merriment is made. And this is kind of a funny one, but Max McGee kept complimenting my ascots because that's my favorite neckwear, is an ascot or a cravat. And after a few drinks, we came up with the brilliant idea of forming a Scion society around cravats and neckwear and Victorian neckwear. And so Ascot Lanyard was born. And as you can see, Peter Blah and Michael Keane, who's Wiggins, have a great sense of humor because they did allow us to become an official Scion society of the BSI. You are all invited to join. We already have an active Facebook page with some pretty wacky pictures on it of people wearing ascots, cravats, scarves. One of the most unique ascots, which I won't even get into, what Paul Thomas Miller wears in one of the pictures. So everyone is welcome to join. And you can be a yarder. That's what we're calling ourselves. So just wanted to share that information with you. And speaking of the PSI, because that's where that picture was taken from, we are going to have our investiture meeting in a couple of weeks. It will be from 2:30 to 4 Eastern time. And Peter Blah will start by talking about the early days of the PSI and a bit about Luther Norris. And then Max McGee will give a talk on Derleth's days as a student at the University of Wisconsin, where he came up with the solar ponds character. And then I, with the blessing of George Vanderberg, will be giving out the investitures for the class of 2024. So if you want to come, you don't have to be a member of the PSI or even a Solar Ponds fan. If you just want to check it out, you're all welcome to join. I think I already did send the link out a couple of weeks ago, but I will send out the Zoom link to you guys again. All right. And then the last thing I just wanted to announce, because this just happened on last Saturday, is that at the Dr. Watson's Neglected Patients 49th annual dinner, which is the Denver Science Society, we turn 50 pretty soon, actually late at the end of this year, we turn 50. But I was elected as chief surgeon, taking on from Darlene Seipser, who'd been doing it for quite a number of years. And so I'm now the kind of like the president, we call it the chief surgeon of the association. And that picture here has me with the two Jeffs. In the middle is Jeff Fockingham, who's going to be our speaker next month, and he won the Brick Award. And then on the other side of him is Jeff Fladung, who is now the staff surgeon, and that's the vice president. So, and I think that both Jeffs are on the call. So congratulations to you both as well. Jeff's holding the Brick Award in the center, Jeff Fockingham, because he won the quiz that week, which I actually gave, and it was a tough one. It was Animals in the Canon. And so he did pretty good on it. So, all right. So lastly, are there any other announcements? I'm going to stop sharing for a sec because I think I just saw a hand raised. Steve, my friend, what's up?
So a couple of them on the for the crew, the Bark Lone Star. For people that don't know, we just issued out our 8th book. It's called Hometown Homes, where homes came and solved mysteries within your own hometown or community. We were very proud that 26 different Sherlockians submitted essays or stories for it, including 3 10-year-olds, which we thought was really neat that we got some kids to submit. You can download the book for free as a PDF file off the Crew site, or if you want to buy the book, it's on Barnes & Noble at cost. So I think it's like $7 or a little more than $7. So just go to Barnes & Noble and search the Crew, the Bark Lone Star, and you'll find all 8 of our books are up there. We are going to start working on our 9th book, and any Sherlockian is welcome to submit a story for it. It is going to be called Mr. Holmes's Neighborhood, and this is where you're going to be writing about people that live on 221, live on Baker Street or have to deal with Baker Street and all the craziness that goes around 221. And so it could be a next door neighbor who was wondering why there's gunshots coming through his wall that look like a VR, or the commissioner that has to deliver notes to Mr. Holmes, or, the page boy, whatever you want to do. But it's going to be a fun one, of just what you have to go through to deal with all the craziness there. If you do want to write a story, the deadline is, I believe, October 1st. And just, send it to us, and it will go in the book, and you will get a free copy of the book as our thanks for doing that as a Christmas present. The other thing I did want to bring up real quick, if you didn't see it yesterday, we just announced that the Beacon Society, we administer the Fortescue Scholarship, and every year we put out a recertification exam. We just put out a special one yesterday. That's a gentleman named Elliot Kimball, who was a BSI back in the 60s, issued this quiz back in 1964. So this is the 60th anniversary of it. And we got permission from the Baker Street Journal to reissue this quiz. And so it's 100 questions straight from the canon. So, but it's a lot of fun. And if you do finish it and submit it back to the Beacon Society, you'll get a special certificate from us for finishing that quiz. So. And on a personal note, I will brag about that on Friday night at the Gaslight Gala, my son, Rusty, won the Beacon Award for 2023. So I was very proud of him for that, for all of his work on the website and everything else he's done for the Beacon Society. So
As I say, well deserved, definitely well
Yeah.
deserved. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that and for making that announcement as well. Yeah, anybody else have an announcement? All right. We are now going to move on to our feature for the day. I'm going to share my screen just one more time though, because I do want to. All right, and there is Margie, our featured author, with both of her books at the Belanger Books table this year at the BSI weekend. And these books are incredible. I just have to tell you guys, you really need to read them. So Margie Deck lives in the Pacific Northwest, where she is busy planning her next story collection. Her previous collections were published in December by Belanger Books, The Genius of the Place, as you can see there, a collection of original Gothic tales inspired by Arthur Conan Doyle's work in the Strand magazine, and a collection of Sherlock Holmes adventures titled With Remarkable Cunning, The Manservant of Merripit House, and Other Tales of Sherlock Holmes. She is the co-editor with Nancy Holder of Sherlock Holmes of Baking Street, another really fun book that they put together. And she's also co-editor with Nancy of the Arthur Conan Doyle Society's The Terror of Blue John Gap manuscript annotation project. And you can go to the Arthur Conan Doyle Society website and see all the different articles and things as she's putting up the entire original manuscript of one of my absolute favorite Doyle stories. Her short stories and essays have been published by Belanger Books, Wildside Press, and others. She is a longtime member of the Sound of the Baskervilles in Seattle. She is also a charter member of the John H. Watson Society, where she currently serves as treasurer. Since the rise of Zoom, she's a long-distance member of other Sherlockian societies, including the Legion of Zoom, the Literary Agents, the Tea Brokers of Mincing Lane, the Bark Lone Star, and of course, 5 Miles from Anywhere. I also want to add, in my opinion, that I rank Margie up there with like Bonnie McBird as one of my absolute favorite Sherlock Holmes authors today. And I just think she's phenomenal. And let's give her a big round of virtual applause. And we're going to do a little interview with her. So,
Brad, see, I can't even think now. You just messed my brain all up. Thank you very much. Up there with Bonnie. Okay, I'll try not to cry. And I will say that Zoom is not my best medium, so I'll try not to mess up too much. So
that's all right.
Be kind.
All right. I'm going to go to speaker view here. There we go. All right. So we're going to do this in interview format, everyone. So there's no slideshow or anything like that. We're just going to have a conversation, and then we're going to invite you to ask questions later. So that's kind of where we're going to go with this today. So Margie, let's talk about these two books. You've got The Genius of the Place, which is a Doylean story collection, you know, and you, as you said, you know, set up with, or as I said in the intro, set up with like Doyle's Gothic stories, and you kind of jam on it, right? You got one of Doyle's stories followed by one of your own. And then you've got a Sherlock Holmes story collection, which has stories which connect to other canonical tales, but does not include the stories that connect to. So I'm just wondering, just to start with, why did you, in the first book, have the original stories and then kind of go from there? And then in the Holmes one, you had your home stories, but not the originals. I was just curious to know what your thoughts were when you organized these books.
Okay, that's a lot of questions all at once. I think it's because the Sherlock Holmes book, several of those stories you had already published, thank you, in different anthologies. And so there were different themes, and they were set in different time periods. And I got to be careful here because I believe David Markham's on this, and he'll be correcting my chronology. And I hope he does, because I always get it wrong. But I'm a huge fan of chronology. I aspire to do it. I can't do it, but I aspire to it. So I read everyone else's. So when I started putting the Sherlock Holmes stories together, I had 4 or 5. And of course, I needed a few more to actually have a book. So I did 5 or 6 more originals to go in. So I built a chronology based on what I had to work with, and then went and filled in the slots. So that book was more about a progression of Holmes and Watson from right after the time of the Hound of the Baskervilles up to right at the end of World War I. So it is quite a period of time. And I think if I had tried to put in all the other stories that are referenced, the actual Sherlock Holmes stories, the book would have been too big. And I felt like the people who were kind enough to read this book would be familiar enough with the Sherlock Holmes stories that they talked about that it wasn't necessary.
All right, so let's talk a little bit more about Genius of the Place.
Okay.
Because that one you do, right? You do kind of do the jam where you have like Doyle's story and then you have Holmes' story. And at one point, you referred to the work as you felt you were writing with Doyle and Holmes, if I'm correct on that. So obviously, I get the Doyle connection, but why did you also feel like you were writing with Holmes with that particular book?
Okay, so the inspiration for that book was to read one of the Gothic tales and see what it inspired me to write. And because the Gothic genre is so much fun. That's just playground. I'm just having a great time there. But I found out when I sat down and tried to do it that I'm just saturated in Sherlock Holmes. And there was no way to get his voice and Watson's voice out of my writing at that time. And also because since these are Doyle's Gothic stories, they're basically set in the same time and place as the Sherlock Holmes stories. And so there's all this interlap. And so every time I sat down to write a Gothic story, everyone began from connecting dots in the Sherlock Holmes world, and then being inspired by what Doyle had done in the Gothic story. I think the very first one is perhaps the most meta, to use a popular word right now, because it came from the idea of the Sherlock Holmes is real, Watson is real, Doyle was the literary agent. And so my story kind of jumped off from the point of, well, what if somebody really believes that is so true that they take it as truth in every part of their life? And what if they carry that over and then suddenly decide that everything that Conan Doyle put out was based on a truth? So my poor fellow in Whitney's story, he thinks he's Isa Whitney. He thinks Doyle was writing about him. And so he decides everything Doyle reported was true. And so he tries to recreate the events of the Silver Mirror in his own life, to disastrous results, of course. But that's kind of the starting point for the whole thing was, what if? Yes, the Sherlockian game is true. Well, if that's true, what if some of this other could be true as well? And so what I ended up doing was every single character in the other stories came from Sherlock Holmes's world.
Oh, that's interesting. Nice.
So there should be several layers to it. So you should have a layer where you can just read the Gothic story and enjoy it. You can read it as a complement to Doyle with his story that's there with it. But if you're baked in Sherlock Holmes, like most of us on this call are, then you're going to have a whole nother layer of information and thoughts that's going to contribute to your enjoyment of the Gothic story. I hope. That's the plan.
I would say you were successful on that. Wait, I am curious about like some of the choices you made. Like, for example, you have a sequel to Blue John Gap, and I know we kind of have to talk around because we don't want to give things away. But I found that to be a very, very different story than, say, the original Blue John Gap. It was definitely a Gothic story, the way you wrote it, with kind of a surprise ending. But I was just wondering, like, how did you make decisions about like how close to be to the original or to how to far to diverge away from it? Or did it just kind of come as you wrote?
It was really more just as it came. I didn't want to rewrite Doyle's story, even though that's kind of fun. The very first one with Staunton, the missing three-quarter, that story about his experiences is probably the most like Doyle's story, the beetle hunter. He gets hired for a weird job and he goes and he basically gets hired because of who he is instead of what he can do, but he ends up using what he can do to save everybody's life. So, but I kind of lost my thought now where we were going with this. But as far as Blue John Gap, I didn't just want to recreate that story. So in my mind, what's it about? A guy goes into a cave and finds a monster. So I sent somebody into a cave that found a monster, sort of. He never really saw what it was. He doesn't know what happened to himself. He just knows somebody saved him from this terrible thing that was trying to get him.
Right.
And so, and that character was really fun for me to write because that's Helen Stoner's husband. And that story jumped off of 2 sentences from Helen Stoner's story. Because one, right at the beginning, when she's telling Holmes that she needs help, that she's scared and everything's vague, but she does it. There's a little sentence that kind of gets thrown away right there that I'm not sure we all pay attention to. But she says something, the person I should be able to look to help me with this thinks it's just the notions of a nervous woman. He gives me averted eyes and vague answers. And then it goes on, because it doesn't say this is my fiance, but who else could it be?
Right.
And so that stuck with me. So I took him and I put him somewhere where if he tries to talk to anybody about this, he's going to get averted eyes and vague answers and patted on the hand. And so I wanted him to feel what she felt and to not really know exactly what happened, because Sherlock Holmes in the Gothic stories does not show up to save the day. So
correct.
Someone does for him. I'm not going to let it go here. Someone does for him, but he's not exactly sure who or what. But there's something mysterious in the cave. So that's the fun. It's a cave story. There's a monster in the cave. So you can have all kinds of monsters. It's just what kind are they? Sometimes the monsters are in your head, that too, right?
So you talked about a lot about how Holmes inspired your Doyle stories, and you kind of played him into it. How about the opposite? I mean, what about the Gothic stories? And did you end like why out of all Doyle's writing, why Gothic? And then also, did that blend in or bleed into your Holmes stories as you're doing kind of both at the same time?
I was doing them both at the same time.
Yeah.
So when the muse would go away on the Gothic, would go over and write some Holmes, because Holmes is a pattern. And so if you can think of something fun for him to do, there's a way to write it. So you don't have to be quite as dependent on the muse. I think writing the Gothic stories affected the Holmes stories in a very subtle way, but it was more about Watson being confident, because my characters in the Gothic stories are based a lot on Watson. They're, young men, most are doctors. And so, but they're confident and they're problem solvers and they go about things, they want answers. So they're a lot like Holmes and Watson that way. So when I'm writing Holmes again, Watson is confident more so perhaps than he might be in especially in some of the earlier Sherlock Holmes stories. And the Holmes is more willing to say what he wants and what he needs and what he's doing. And I think part of that confidence to just say comes from Doyle being more confident in his writing. When I did so much reading, when I watched him write, when the stories are back and forth in the strand, here's a Holmes story, here's a Gothic story, here's a Holmes story, here's a Gothic story over a period of time, I really saw Doyle kind of get stronger and I don't know if confident is the right word, but he just knew what he was doing. And it was fun watching that happen. So that was my hope in the Holmes book, is that you would see Holmes and Watson just coming into their own, into what they do entirely. Does that make any sense? Sort of. So I can go
that makes quite a bit of sense.
but so there is an influence on the homes, but I think it's kind of subtle, but it is there if you're looking. And of course, they're also aging in my book. You know,
Sure.
we're going from the young men all the way up to at the end of the First World War. So there is quite a period of time there. And having reached a certain age myself, I understand how some of the aging works and how your brain might work a little differently, a little more straightforward, a little more less concerned about other people and thoughts and whatnot. So, okay.
No, very good. So you talked a little bit about, you mentioned the speckled band kind of tied in with one of your Doyle stories. You mentioned Hound tying in to Holmes. So definitely you're talking more of the Gothic Holmes stories. But talk about just in general, like what made you choose the Holmes stories that you kind of, riffed from and kind of expanded upon?
Okay, let me find my notes so I don't just wander around all over the place. I think the main thing I've already touched on most of it is that these 6 men that are in these stories in the Gothic book, most of them, except for poor Jim Browner, who's the last one, are very much like John Watson in temperament and intelligence. Okay, and so we've got Staunton from The Missing Three-Quarter. We've got Anstruther or Anstruther. How do you say his name, guys? From Watson's Medical Practice Substitute, the one who fills in for him. And then we've got John Hopley Nelligan, who's a very interesting young man when you really go back and look hard at Black Peter. Because Watson is not very kind about him. He talks about, well, he's kind of small and he's kind of hesitant. Well, when I look at this guy, he's out there chasing these people down, trying to figure out what happened to his father. So I kind of got off into what it is to be haunted by your father. And so there's a lot of fertile ground there. And then we talked about Percy. And then Jim Browner, who doesn't quite fall into that description. But we already know that he's no longer capable of thinking by the time we get to the end of his story. But on a Gothic sense, he's a very interesting man to talk about very briefly about death and sleep and guilt and fear of pain. So that's kind of where that went. So it's a very short story. It's only 1,000 words, but I think it made a point about how someone can cause a lot of pain and then can not live with it or do live with it in life and death. So did I answer the question or did I just go all off entirely? I'm not sure. So sorry.
So it sounds like
one other thing about Doyle is that one thing I did notice on the Gothic stories, he tones down the Victorian trappings a bit and the Edwardian trappings. So the things, he really kind of makes those not as important as down to core human events and core human fears. And so that makes them a little more fun to write because you get down to what's inside people and you don't always get the answer. That's fun too.
So you didn't want to choose like Jabez Wilson because you didn't want to like go for the Red-Headed League and do like a little bit of comedy. You had very clear, you had to develop.
No, I'm more interested in people who are haunted and have crazy families. And I don't mean this as haunted by ghosts. I'm thinking about the haunted by their past. They're haunted by something that their family did. They're haunted by their failures. You know, my poor Percy is kind of haunted for the fact that he couldn't save his wife. And he says, he makes an offhand remark that Sherlockians will get that says, my wife was smarter than I am, and she was saved by 2 men who were wiser than I am. And so he's still kind of living with that, the fact that he failed her. And of course, we know that, we think we know that she died. So I wrote it, this is after she's dead. And he's still trying to deal with all of that.
Yeah, definitely. No, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense. Were there, I mean, we're talking a lot about Holmes, we're talking a lot about Doyle. Were there any other authors that you also kind of from the time period or even today that kind of just influenced you in some way as you were putting these together?
Yes. Okay. So I'm totally self-taught. And so the only way I can write anything is to read and read and read and read and read. So I wanted to go back. I wanted to be influenced by the Gothic, but I wanted to be of that time period. Again, chronology is so important to me, and I wanted to stay enmeshed in that world. So I went back to a few things I hadn't been in many years. Went back and read Dracula, read Stoker after a 40-year break. What a revelation that was. I had forgotten what that book was about, and it's genius. And so that was wonderful. Other than he had me fall all off into a folklore rabbit hole for a while. And then, of course, I read Dorian Gray again. I went back and read a selection of Poe's short stories again. I'd kind of forgotten how funny he was. Kind of like Doyle, he sneaks the comedy in there when you aren't expecting it. Jekyll and Hyde, of course, and I read a collection of M.R. James. And then there was one book that if you haven't read, I'd like to give a boost for. Just a second. For the indispensable Leslie Klinger. We got to have Leslie Klinger. He edited an anthology. It's called In the Shadow of Edgar Allan Poe, Classic Tales of Terror from 1816 to 1914. And I learned so much from reading this book about how to write Gothic, and it doesn't have to be a ghost story, how to write a Gothic and it can be a ghost story, but you can leave your reader wondering what kind of ghost it was and did it really exist. And so this was just like a textbook, and I read it through twice. And I recommend it highly if you have some free time in your to be read pile, and y'all just stuff it in there somewhere. It'll fit. And then I did one other thing, Doyle's contemporary, Jerome's memoir, My Life and Times. That book is amazing because, of course, he was Conan Doyle's friend. He was Conan Doyle's adversary on political and social issues a bit. And then he's living in the same world. He's publishing and writing. And so, he's a terrible name dropper. He's always dropping names. But I learned a lot about living in that time that was not Holmes and Watson. So it was good to learn something that was interesting. Although I have to say he broke my heart because he has a whole couple of pages of how awful it was to ride in a hansom cab. What a pleasure it was when they were gone and you had another choice. I almost cried. It's like, oh no, don't tell me that. But if you haven't read it, I was going to show it to you. It doesn't matter. It is a wonderful book. If you're interested in another view of living in London at that time. And of course, he talks about Doyle on several different pages because they were friends and they did do things together. But I found it to be very helpful, very helpful. It's also in language, in how because he's quoting a bunch of people, they're talking to one another and they're writing notes. And so you got a feel for how Watson, because that's the one here in my head all the time, is John Watson. So I will tell you a quick story about that right there, though. I received the loveliest compliment from Sonia Featherston. She was reading the Holmes collection. She sent me a note and she said, I want to know if you hear David Burke in your head when you're writing those stories. And I said, well, no, I don't. But she said, I keep hearing him talking to me when I'm reading your stories. I said, well, oh, that's wonderful. And I thought about it a little bit, and it's like, okay, that is a compliment. And I'll tell you why.
Oh, yes, that's a compliment.
Okay, so that's the first year of the series when they were so faithful to Doyle's texts and words. And so if she's hearing David Burke talking, then she's hearing Conan Doyle's words. And so that made me happy. It made me feel like I got a good feel for making this feel like Doyle's world and Watson's world.
And I would agree. I think you've nailed it. And So I would agree with Sonia on that one. Just to wrap up my end of the questions, and I'll open it up for others to chime in. And if anyone wants to even put a question in the chat or a comment, that may be something to do right now. But I just want to know, like, okay, where's the future? Where are we going next? So more Holmes, more Doyle, more of both. And, are you going to stick with the Gothic? Or are you going to do something different? Like, what
Well,
are
the
you thinking
Gothic
right now?
is a ton of fun. So, but I'm thinking, and you and I have talked about this just vaguely, about maybe an anthology and invite some of my buddies in to do some Gothic work, inspired by Doyle. I'm not exactly sure where we're going with it entirely, but I think we could have some fun. And so I would like to do that. I have some ideas, which I will be sending to you. She says, as Nancy Holder would say, just saying, Mr. Publisher, that I do have some thoughts on the matter, but I would like to do that. I have a little bit of an idea about a novel too, so I don't know about that nonsense. We'll see what happens. I really like the pressure of the short form. And my brain tends to wander off all over the place. So really that confinement of the short form is a good thing. So I'm not sure, but yes, I would like to do more Gothic stories. Yes, I would like to do more Gothic stories with Doyle, perhaps in a different format and with some friends. And I don't know about more home stories. I always worry that we're full of them, but we're never full of them. We're never full of them. They're always fun and somebody's always interested. So I just don't want to be too self-imitating. Because here's, as I say, as I'm imitating someone else. Not on the Gothics. I'm not imitating Doyle on the Gothics, I promise. But yeah, so there's that thing. It's just finding something original to say. I hope I do, because it's fun to do.
Yes, absolutely.
People have been very kind about them, so I hope so.
One thing I find with Holmes, when you decide you're done or you're just stuck on stories, just give it, a week and Watson will whisper in your ear and suddenly you'll have 5 ideas. So that's from my
And
own.
then you're off and running again. Yes.
All right, I would like to open it up just to see. I'm going to change the view to gallery so I can see everybody here. But I want to give people a chance if anyone has questions for Margie or any comments. And I think Larry's got his hand up first. Go ahead, Larry.
I just have some comments, which I think sounds really, really interesting. I just started reading your Sherlock Holmes book.
Oh, thank you.
Thing I just read the first one that's the sequel to The Hound, and now I'm reading one about John Clay, and so I'm just getting started, just the beginning of it. But I am enjoying it, and it is interesting. I didn't realize that's what I was reading. When I started, I didn't really understand what you were doing there. You say something about not having Lestrade in the stories and stuff in the beginning, but I didn't really understand what you were attempting to do, how they're all linked to Sherlock Holmes stories. So that's very, very interesting. It's a very nice surprise. And the thing is about me, is I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan, and I'm part of a group in Denver as part of the great called the Outpatients, which is part of Dr. Watson's Neglected Patients, which Derek is now the chief surgeon of. And we go through the Sherlock Holmes stories. We go through the canon every couple of years. So I read the Sherlock Holmes stories over and over again as time goes on. But I haven't read Doyle stories in decades. I realized, even though, Derek, I know, has published a couple of books that have his, has a lot of his, Doyle stories in them. And, but I really haven't gone back to them. But your book sounds like a great way to do that. And to get back into them, so I'm gonna definitely try your new book as well about that connects to Doyle stories, because I haven't read Doyle stories in decades, and I barely remember them now that I think about it. And so I'm gonna try to do that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I think you'd be amazed at being reminded at how good he actually was. And I haven't read them all. I tend to read the same things over and over, but some of them I was really struck by, like the Sealed Room.
Mhm.
when you start trying to describe what that story's about, it's ridiculous. You know, some guy's been dead in the house for 7 years and nobody opened the door, and that, I mean, honestly, if someone commits suicide in your house down the hall, you're gonna know it. Nature's gonna there's gonna be ways for nature to tell you you've got a problem down the hall. So some things can be ridiculous, but he has such a good hand at it, that genius of the place. He knows how to build that to where you're just going right along with him. It's like, okay, yeah. And then, later you stop to think about it. It's like, oh, wait a minute. But
Unless you cover the smell by painting the house.
Yeah, okay, or true, or turn on the gas, right?
No,
Well, he didn't bother with any of that. But really what that story's about is how the actions of the father entrap the son, and entrap the son more ways than just living poor in the house. There's this great quote I read somewhere that Gothic can be boiled all the way down. It's here on my wall, so I don't forget. It's the story of how you get an insidious influence on your soul and your sanity. And that's what happened to this poor guy who's living in the house with daddy dead upstairs, and he doesn't realize it, but he's trapped by his dad, and it's made it, and his dad's disappearance has been an awful thing for his soul, and it's had an influence on him. So
you ever looked in his room?
yeah, so they he filled the room up,
Find
and the
his
guy
father
was down the hall,
decades,
and
but he never looked in his room. All right. Well,
so okay, I'll stop preaching now. Sorry.
okay.
I love that stuff. It's
I
just
look
so
forward to reading
interesting.
it. That's interesting.
All right, Tom Burns, you get your hand up. You got to unmute, sir.
There we go.
There you go.
Getting better. Margie, I just got both of your books.
Thank you.
So you did a good job selling them to me. Tell me what you think a Gothic story is. And I mean, I haven't read Doyle's. I've read The Turn of the Screw. I've read Mary Roberts Reinhardt back in the day. But I'd like your take. And I also wrote a Natalie McMaster's, these are contemporary, Gothic story, where I had the big house and all of the strange people and the insidious influence that you just brought up. But just tell me what you think it is, and because I'm interested and I might do some more.
Well, I think that basically, when you boil it all down, you can have some of the trappings, the eerie place, and which we really want to have. But the eerie place can be right here in your head. You don't have to actually have it in a room. It doesn't have to be a physical place, because I think it's more boiling down to the internal motivations of your character is what is playing on them, what is playing on their mind, what is playing on how their body lives. And so it's more like, well, what I was just talking about, you have this influence. So what does the influence look like? Well, it can be the traditional with the atmospheric and the dark and the danky and the mysterious and the crazy aunt in the attic that nobody talks about. Or it can be just what's in your head. I mean, in Whitney's reflection, of course, he's using drugs, so that's part of it too. But he's got this whole universe in his head about what's happening. And he bases it on all these books that he's read. And he starts to create someone who was a witch in the 16th century. He starts trying to do her magic because he read it in a book, and surely it's true. And so he causes himself some terrible events because of it. And so I think for me, Gothic is the elements of Gothic in somebody's body, and then what you do with that, and then you can put pressure on that head and that body and see what happens. Did I answer the question?
Yes, you did.
Okay. I tried to get the market down, lose track a little bit.
I'm happy because I think that's what I did in the Natalie McMaster story. It's called Venom, plug.
Okay.
But without even knowing it.
Right?
So are you a plotter or a pantser?
Pantser, totally.
Okay,
I'm-
cool. Me too.
I am totally situational. We start with the situation and then just see where it goes. And I read this wonderful things about people who have all their stories outlined and they know what the last word is going to be before
Yep.
they ever start writing. And I don't even know what the second sentence is usually. I'm just trying to,
Wouldn't you love to be that way? I continually try and I can't.
I just can't do it. Yeah, sit around and wait for the muse and hopes that she's in a good mood and things start moving. You can always tell when you've kind of crossed that point where, okay, now I've come out of pantsing, now the story's going. You feel it. It's like,
Well,
okay,
I've
let's
come
go,
out
let's
of
go, let's go.
plotting and now the story's going.
Now the story's going, but oh no, that's why I'm incredibly slow. Derek was entirely patient with me. It took me forever to do this because I'm so slow, because it's just got to let it percolate for a while.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you. And so we're close to out of time. I do want to give Jeff a chance to talk about next month. So let's give a virtual round of applause to Margie, because she
Thank
did such a
you.
great job. And
I appreciate you and your
highly
interest.
recommend both those books. And I'm not just saying that because I published them. I think, Margie is just fantastic. And I cannot recommend her books enough. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. I know you're not a morning person, and she's, West Coast time here. So
Listen to me be all whiny about having to be somewhere at 9. So it's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. So next month, we're going to hear from a different Sherlock Holmes author, and that he wrote 2 young adult Sherlock Holmes books. They're excellent, and they take place in Minnesota. Jeff, do you want to talk about what you're going to say a little bit next month?
Sure. My screen shows I'm not muted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you fine, sir.
Well, thanks, Margie. It was very interesting. I enjoyed it. As Derek said, I've published 2 works of historical fiction for young adults. First one, Sherlock Holmes and the County Courthouse Caper, is set in 1886 near the border between the Dakota Territories and the relatively new state of Minnesota. 2 small towns are fighting over the site of the county seat courthouse. The battle is interrupted by a serial killer who is eventually tracked down by Sherlock Holmes with the help of a 12-year-old frontier lad who serves as the story's narrator. And its sequel, Sherlock Holmes in Search of the Source, is set 10 years later in the booming capital city of St. Paul, Minnesota. Our young narrator, now 22, is about to be married when a dead body is found in the ashes of a fire, and a key member of the bridal party is accused of arson and murder. So I'm going to talk about how I decided to bring Sherlock Holmes into my stories and why I chose not to use Dr. Watson as my narrator. And I'll read a few excerpts that illustrate how those decisions affected my work as a writer, and also how it worked out for the readers, especially younger readers. So I hope you all can join us and bring along some friends. Congratulations to Derek on your BSI investiture and your election as chief surgeon. And thanks again, Margie. Enjoyed it very much.
All right. And that wraps us up for today, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. And this is always a great way to start the month. And I will see you in March. Jeff, we're looking forward to that talk. Margie, again, thank you so much. Take care, everyone.